Silver the Hedgehog, a beloved Sonic character first introduced in the highly controversial game of Sonic 06, optimistically hoping for a proper reintegration into the franchise and its stories. He has existed as a character for 20 years now, and yet, Sega and Sonic Team don't really seem to know how to use him. His introductory game established his character as a telekinetic hedgehog from 200 years into Sonic's future, who traveled back in time in an attempt to save his world from the disastrous future he'd been forced to endure. Regardless of Sonic 06's reputation, overall story, and clunky gameplay, Silver's story, at the very least, is admittedly compelling, but he hasn't really had any compelling story ever since. Any inclusion he has had since has utilized his character very poorly. The way I see it, there are three crucial factors with Silver's implementation that need to be carefully considered, but are often not even addressed. The first is the rules of time travel themselves, the second is how he travels back in time, and the third is why he travels back in time. I'm going to dive a bit deeper into each of these, starting with the rules of time travel. Since Silver has been established as a character from the future, he can only be involved in the Sonic stories if Silver travels back in time to Sonic's present. Time travel stories always run the risk of being really messy, which is why fictional franchises typically establish what the time travel rules are within their universe whenever they go to tackle time travel stories. Some franchises establish that there is only one timeline, one series of events, forever and always. Anything future people go back in time to do already occurs in the present. Other franchises establish multiple timelines, so if you go back in time and change things, you're not changing your time's past, but are instead creating a branched timeline. The third version of time travel involves one singular timeline that can be altered with time travel. So if you go back in time and meddle with things, you run the risk of erasing your own future. This last rule of time travel seems to be the one the Sonic franchise uses, though it can be inconsistent itself. This is evidenced, once more, in Sonic 06, as the events in that game as a whole get wiped out when Elise blows out her birthday candle. There are inconsistencies throughout the story as you play through the game, though, that seem to follow the first version of time travel, where there is only ever one timeline. The biggest example is Mephiles' involvement as a whole, as he is already present from the start of the story, even though Shadow has not yet gone back in time to seal him in the scepter. Elise having Iblis sealed within herself from the start of the game is another effect of this singular timeline rule. But if this were the case, that there is only one timeline forever and always, then why do the events of the game as a whole get erased when Elise blows out the flame? By that logic, the game should have never even happened. If Mephiles was already present from the start, then the flame should also have already been blown out from the start. I guess this is why a lot of people will say that Sonic 06 isn't canon, and that the events don't actually happen. It's just highly confusing, though. And it's the reason Silver had to be reintroduced in the equally confusing Sonic Rivals games. So now let's talk about those games. Silver travels back in time to stop, I'm going to call him alternate Eggman, alright? From ruining the world and to bring him back to the future. This makes no sense. Alternate Eggman was introduced just the previous year in Sonic Rush as Eggman's counterpart in Blaze's dimension. Why is he now a 200-year future Eggman descendant in Sonic Rivals? And then, he's again from an alternate universe in Sonic Rush Adventure, only to be a 200-year future Eggman again, only 2 months later in Sonic Rivals 2! I get that the Rush and Rivals games were developed by different people, but come on. They should have had someone making sure there weren't such massive inconsistencies between all these games. Since Blaze is canonically from a different dimension, I subscribe to the idea that the Rush games are canon, meaning alternate Eggman is from a different dimension and not the future. So then, what does that mean for the Rivals stories? They're Silver's canonical reintroduction to the franchise. Ugh! I do have to make a note here, and that is that, upon further investigation into alternate Eggman's character, it seems his involvement in all these stories has been explained away by establishing his character as being from the future, and that, in the Rush games, he pretended to be from the Soul Dimension. I hate that. I think him being from Blaze's dimension rather than from the future is more fun and interesting. It also just doesn't make sense why he would both travel back in time and cross into another dimension. I can understand a villain traveling back in time or going into another dimension, but to do both for one objective is bizarre to me. People complain about Mephiles not making sense with his plan and whatnot, but future version alternate Eggman makes even less sense, in my opinion. But I digress. Anyway, back to Silver. Things get even more confusing with all this time traveling and lack of rule laying when we get to Sonic Generations, where Silver is once again written in quite a confusing manner. The inclusion of Crisis City, Silver battling Sonic, and if we look at Shadow Generations, Kingdom Valley and Mephiles, it would seem to suggest that maybe there are branched timelines in the Sonic universe? Or perhaps, and I think this is the more interesting take, which can be backed up by Mephiles' line at the end of his boss fight, perhaps these are just echoes of a former version of the timeline. They're not full-fledged timelines of their own, but they exist in the shadows of the standing timeline. None of this explains Silver's behavior, though. Sonic first comes across Silver in the Crisis City area of White Space, where he has to challenge Silver to a fight to get his Chaos Emerald. Except he doesn't really challenge Silver to a fight, it's more like Silver decides to chase Sonic across a burning city while throwing cars at him. I'd hardly consider that two rivals sparring with each other. And Silver doesn't hold back at all. He is straight up going for a pancaked Hedgehog. But this aggressive behavior from Silver could just make this Silver from Sonic 06, similar to Mephiles' boss fight inclusion for Shadow. But then Silver is all buddy-buddy by the end of the game cheering Sonic on. Huh? Is this 06 Silver or not? If it is, he should absolutely not be coming in to support Sonic, and if it isn't, then, again, why is he unfazed by Crisis City and totally cool with throwing cars at Sonic? The real kicker with Sonic Generations that I don't understand at all is that the restored timeline sends Silver to Sonic's birthday party. Huh? At least Shadow Generations got it right with Maria and Gerald Robotnik being sent back to their own time. With Sonic Generations' re-release, they should have taken Silver out of this scene at the end. They changed dialogue and made some minor animation changes to the cutscenes, so I would expect that they could have gotten Silver out of there too. How does he get back to his actual own time then? Which leads me to my next point about Silver's implementation. How does he time travel? Silver often feels like he's just being shoehorned into things just for the sake of it, without actual thought into the justification of how or why. It's gotten to the point that I sometimes feel like the writers focus more on Silver's character being a time traveler over anything else, when time traveling isn't even an inherent character trait of his. And I'll try to explain what I mean by this. Silver is just present more often than not, without even an explanation of how he got there. The previously mentioned Rivals games that were his reintroduction didn't even bother to explain how he traveled back in time, and then back into his own time. Maybe alternate Eggman had a machine that sent him back, and Silver used that to chase after him. Sure, I suppose that's plausible, though it's never stated. And then, even if that is the case, how do they get back to the future? He's just kind of bouncing around time by mysterious means. When Silver was first introduced in Sonic 06, he wasn't a time traveler in the sense that he had an inherent ability to control time, or was destined to travel by way of the universe. He only traveled back in time to try to save his future when Mephiles sent him there. Later, he is also able to time travel through the use of Chaos Control in conjunction with another Chaos Control user, such as Shadow. But nowadays, Silver just pops up in Sonic's time without any mention of how. It's like the writers were like, oh, well, he's a time traveler, so of course he's there. Yeah, that's not how that works. If there were at least some mention of him using the time stones from Sonic CD, or using Chaos Control with Future Shadow, or something, then I wouldn't take issue with the how when it comes to him traveling through time. But there's no mention of anything like that anywhere. And then, in the IDW comics, it gets even worse. Sonic makes a mention of how he doesn't know how Silver time travels, and then, in this later issue, Silver himself straight up says he has no control over his time traveling, and that he gets sent to different times because saving the future is his job, his purpose. So, Silver time travels by the sheer will of the universe. The universe sends him whenever he needs to be, which is so stupid. It makes him out to be more like some supernatural, beyond mere mortal being that he was not introduced as. And this is what I'm talking about when I say the writers focus on Silver being a time traveler above anything else. And so, because this is how Silver is written in these comics, they then make him basically immune to the timeline. He travels freely between times without being impacted by any changes made. That doesn't make any sense. The reason he had to be reintroduced after Sonic 06 is because the erasure of those events meant that Silver did not know any of the characters from Sonic's time, and vice versa. He has no memory of those events, just like everyone else. He was just a regular guy like the rest of the Sonic cast. Yeah, he has telekinetic powers, but that's just his personal gimmick, if you will. Sonic has super speed and Tails can fly like a helicopter. Silver's telekinetic abilities aren't that crazy in the Sonic world. So yeah, Silver was just a kid from the future. But no, the IDW comics have completely changed what his character is. Originally, he only got pulled into saving the world by traveling back through time by circumstances explained within the game. But now, Silver is some greater entity destined to protect the future by being whisked around time by the universe itself, being completely unaffected by changes he makes himself. What is even the point, then, in his character being specifically from the future? Maybe part of the reason they write him this way is because they want Silver to remember Sonic and his friends. But that is so boring. It gives Silver no stakes. If Silver meddling with time meant that there was a chance that him improving his future would also mean forgetting the events he participated in, and therefore forgetting his new friends, I think that could be more interesting. Silver would then be in a bit of a conundrum, where he wants to do the right thing and give his world a better future, but he's also gutted by the fact that doing so means losing these friends. Maybe the only friends he's ever had. I personally think that would actually make him more heroic than how he's handled in the comics, where he's just destined to forever save the future with no consequences for himself. Another reason they may choose to write him being immune to the changes is probably so they don't have to have Silver meet everyone again every time he pops up. It would be like Sonic and his friends all remember him, but they'd have to treat Silver like he has amnesia. I can understand why that might be a bit annoying and redundant. Maybe they justify his immunity to the timeline changes with his psychic abilities. But again, he has no memory of the 06 events. Maybe a good middle ground could be that, like how Generations has echoes of past events, maybe Silver's psychic abilities allow him to have echoes of past memories. He wouldn't actually have memories of the events, but there would be something familiar about the world and people he encounters when he travels back. A sense of déjà vu, essentially. And each time he has to travel back in time, and his future is altered, those feelings of familiarity increase. So then, rather than Silver being like, "You guys know me? Who are you?" he would be like, "Wait, you're familiar for some reason. We must have met before, I just can't seem to remember." And now the third point I want to talk about, and possibly the most important point, is why Silver travels back in time. Silver is often just present for the sake of being present. It really feels like the writers don't know what to do with Silver. They want to include him, but they don't really know how to do it. So he ends up just being there. The DS version of Sonic Colors includes Silver. He's just there. No explanation as to how, no mention as to why. He just is there, which had me so incredibly annoyed. He even mentions that his future is great. Why is he there? What was even the point then? And then there's Sonic Forces. Why was he in Sonic Forces? The only thing accomplished by his presence in that game was another character assassination.
I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist.
So okay. What has been established about his character that the writers seem to want to keep consistent is that Silver travels back in time when there is a world-level threat. That was true in 06, true in the IDW Metal Virus arc, and technically true in Forces? Two things need to happen to justify Silver's presence. First, there must be a world-level threat, and second, Silver has to play a major role in neutralizing that threat. As much as I get annoyed with how Silver is handled in the IDW comics, they do at least get this part right. At least for the most part. I still don't know what's up with this gardening side plot. The problem with his involvement in Forces, however, is that he played no pivotal role in the story. He's just there, which makes no sense. If he didn't have any impact on the outcome, then there was never a disastrous future for him to be traveling back to try to fix in the first place. So I re-emphasize, if Silver is involved in a story, then he has to play a vital role in the story. Just picture this, if you will. Imagine if Forces had been written in a way where, yeah, Sonic is captured and Eggman takes over. Great concept. But then, in an attempt to turn the tides back in their favor, Shadow launches a rescue mission where he attempts to free Sonic. In the process, though, Shadow also winds up captured. Being a chaos energy-filled entity, Eggman decides to harness Shadow's power. So Shadow ends up in stasis, unwillingly acting as a power supply for Eggman. Now cut to Silver's time. Silver has gathered enough intel to stage a break-in to the Eggman Empire HQ and aims to steal one of the Chaos Emeralds he has learned is being used as an energy source. He does so, only to find that the energy source he finds first is actually Shadow. He rescues Shadow, they make it out of the Eggman HQ, and they regroup. They'd then have to work together to collect at least 2 emeralds from the Empire that they then would be able to use to induce chaos control, allowing Silver to go back in time 200 years. In Sonic's present time, Silver would then play the vital role of breaking Shadow free, Silver and Shadow could then break Sonic out of Eggman's grasp, and then the 3 of them would work together to end Eggman's reign. This would have been such a cool way to involve Silver, and we could have had levels where you play as Silver too. When was the last time he was a playable character outside of spin-off games? I know I would have been much more excited about getting to play as Silver than to play as some mediocre-looking custom character with the now overused wisps. But no, instead we just got Silver being there somehow and for no reason. Now, I know I've ranted a lot about how Silver's character has been handled, so how would I go about fixing this? This is all going to be subjective, of course, and my own personal opinion, so take that as you will. There's also 0% chance Sonic Team would actually make any of these changes anyway. This is just a fun hypothetical for me. So, as I stated earlier, there are 3 important factors that need to be considered. The first is the rules of time travel. Since there have been no hard rules, and the Sonic universe just seems to use whatever rule is convenient to the story, I think that should be done away with. Sonic Team should establish rules and stick with them. I personally like the singular timeline that can be altered with time travel. I think it works best with what has been done. It makes Sonic 06 make some amount of sense within the overall story, since no one, not even Silver, has memory of those events. And to justify the involvement of the 06 elements in Generations, I do like the idea of those being echoes of past iterations of the singular timeline. Next, Silver has to travel through time by some means that can be explained or justified. He can't just appear in the past just because, and I hate his being whisked around time by the universe itself like in the IDW comics. Don't make him some beyond mere mortal supernatural entity. It makes him less interesting, and takes away any stakes he could have. As I mentioned earlier, he could travel via the Time Stones, or use chaos control with future Shadow. Something. It doesn't have to be the same method for him to travel each time he does either, but it should at least be mentioned or explained briefly. And the third point was that Silver needs a reason to travel back, as well as playing a vital role in the story. His implementation in things like Forces is just so stupid. It would have been better if Silver had had a clear impact on ending Eggman's reign. And since his traveling and participating in past events alters the future, there should be consequences to Silver himself, like what was established in 06. I do also like the idea I presented earlier of Silver having echoes of memories from past iterations, so with enough stories involving Silver, it would get to the point where Silver can travel to Sonic's past and recognize and be familiar with Sonic and his friends, despite not having any actual memories of them. That way, he wouldn't need to be reintroduced, but he also wouldn't remember events that he shouldn't have memory of. That being said, it does mean that I don't think Silver traveling back in time just to visit makes any sense. Silver's current iteration in his proper time would not have memory of the past. Therefore, why would he travel to the past for a visit? As a result, I think it's kind of silly if mainline games include Silver just for the sake of it, and then justify it by saying he's just visiting. The only exception to this I'd be okay with is in spin-off party-like games, such as racing games or like the Olympic Games. Since those aren't really canon to the mainline stories, I think it's okay to include Silver in little things like that. The last thing I would really like to be changed is Silver's reintroductory story. Alternate Eggman's involvement is confusing, and that alone is enough to ruin the Rivals games. These games need a major rewrite, and could potentially lend themselves to an interesting remake. because it would be a major remake. They could change alternate Eggman to actually be from his alternate dimension, which I think would be less confusing in conjunction with the Rush games, and it would imply that had Silver not gone back in time to stop him, his plans would have succeeded. Those plans, I think, would need a rewrite themselves as well, but the idea is a bit more consistent to the overall Sonic universe. Silver would only be traveling back now to change his ruined future, rather than traveling back to chase another future character. And if we want to get really crazy, if alternate Eggman is coming from this other dimension, Blaze could be utilized as well, giving Blaze and Silver a proper introduction to one another. People love Blaze and Silver together, but it makes no sense with the context of the overall story. Yeah, Silver debuted with Blaze as his best friend, which doesn't make sense, but that's an entirely separate issue. But with the erasure of Sonic 06, he doesn't even know who Blaze is. Why is he constantly being shoehorned into being best buds with Blaze? If they made his reintroductory game a story where he travels back in time to stop alternate Eggman from ruining the world, and he meets and works with Blaze in the process of doing so, that would have been the perfect way to re-establish their friendship. But anyway, I think I've ranted enough. I just wish Silver had consistent writing and implementation. As I said at the start of all this, it just feels like Sonic Team doesn't know what to do with him, which is a big shame. He is a unique character in the franchise, and just ends up being severely underutilized. But what are your guys' thoughts? How would you go about fixing Silver's implementation, if at all? Or are you satisfied with how he's utilized? If there's anything else you think I should have touched on, feel free to let me know. Silver's a fun character, and I think he deserves to be discussed more. But that will be all from me for now, and I hope everyone has a great day or night. Alternate Eggman being from the future also just doesn't make sense, because it obviously means that Eggman has biological children at some point, which I don't see happening. He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who's looking to get into a romantic relationship. And with the direction his character has been going lately with the introduction of Sage, I just don't see him wanting biological children. I think Eggman would be more than content with considering Sage his daughter. But additionally, Eggman having biological children would mean him getting with a woman, which I just don't see how any woman would want to get into that kind of relationship with him. I could be wrong, as there could be women who are into villains who try to overtake the world, but I just don't see that happening. And so, if Eggman really wanted children, but there was no woman who wanted him, that would leave just one way for Eggman to have biological children, which I can't say here on YouTube, and it's pretty disturbing. Again, because of the direction Eggman's character has been going with things like Frontiers, where he is being painted as a little more of a sympathetic villain, or having a soft side, or whatever, I doubt Sonic Team would want to imply such a disgusting and disturbing action from him. Oh my gosh, revisiting Sonic Forces and just how badly all the characters were, well, characterized. It made me think that had these writers written this scene from Sonic 06, they would have swapped which characters said these lines here. Shadow would have been the one to say, "If you say it exists in the past, present, and future, I'll destroy them all at once, because I'm the ultimate life form, and I can do anything." And then Silver would be the one to say, "I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. Sonic is gone. It's no use." Oh my gosh, it's so stupid.